comfortable. Ciara had always had a tell. In past relationships, she'd never fully unpacked her bag, not literally sometimes, but always emotionally. There was always one foot angled slightly towards the door, always something held back, some part of herself she kept in reserve against the possibility of having to leave on short notice. She noticed, standing in Nick's kitchen on a Saturday morning in her socks, that she had not done that this time. She didn't know exactly when it had happened. Somewhere between the walk where she asked for time and coming back, and the coffee shop where she'd reached for his hand first, something had quietly let go of the doorframe. She could hear him moving around in the other room, the particular unhurried sounds of someone else's morning routine, sounds she was still learning and hadn't gotten tired of yet. And instead of bracing herself against that comfort, she just let herself feel it. This was what she'd been afraid of wanting, not the person exactly, but the ordinariness of it, the coffee, the borrowed shirt, the ease. She'd spent so long treating ease as a warning sign. If it felt too comfortable, she must be missing something, must be settling, must not be paying enough attention. But standing here, genuinely paying attention, she couldn't find the catch. There was just this. A Saturday morning, someone she trusted in the next room, her own hands around a warm mug. Nick came in looking for coffee and found her already smiling at nothing in particular. "What?" he said. "Nothing," Ciara said. "I'm just good." He poured his coffee and bumped her shoulder lightly passing by, and she didn't over-examine the gesture or archive it against future disappointment. She just felt it and let it go. That was new. That was, she thought, actually what she'd been looking for all along.
Received.
Jazz had been funny her whole life. Funny at her father's kitchen table the last night she saw him, at 9 years old, trying to make her mother laugh through the dinner nobody wanted to be sitting at. Funny in middle school, when being funny was the only social currency that worked reliably. Funny in every room she'd ever walked into since, because the bit was always there, always ready, always between her and whatever she didn't want anyone to see. She was being funny tonight at Marcus's little get-together, doing a full dramatic recreation of a salon appointment that had gone sideways last week, and it was landing, actually landing, the whole room with her, and she felt it the way she always did, that clean, particular pleasure of a story perfectly told. Then she caught Justin's face across the room. He wasn't laughing the way the others were. He was doing something quieter, watching her with this expression she was still getting used to, like he was just genuinely glad to be in the room where she was, no transaction involved, no performance required. She finished the story, and the room clapped, and she drifted toward him after, and he said it simply the way he said most things. "You know what I love about you? You're genuinely funny, like actually funny, not performing it, just you." The old Jazz would have deflected it, made a joke about the distinction, turned the compliment sideways before it could land anywhere vulnerable. She felt the reflex rise, clear as ever. She let it pass. She said, "I know," instead. Not arrogant, not performed confidence either, just the simple, grounded truth of someone who had spent 11 episodes learning to believe something about herself that had always been true. Justin smiled. "Yeah," he said, "you do now." She did.
Letting someone show up. Ava had mentioned offhandedly in a text that she wasn't feeling great. She hadn't asked for anything. She'd said it the way you say it, just a detail, the conversational equivalent of a status update, not a request. She was on her couch an hour later, half watching something she wasn't really following, when her buzzer went off. Corey, Soup from the place 2 blocks from her apartment she'd mentioned once, in passing, 2 weeks ago. "You said you weren't feeling well," he said when she opened the door. "I was already out." He wasn't making it a big thing. He wasn't waiting for her to be grateful in a particular way or register the gesture at the right volume. He just held out the bag. Ava stood in the doorway for a second, and something moved through her that she didn't have a name for right away. She thought about the version of herself from a year ago, the one who kept her apartment too clean when company was coming, who pre-performed low maintenance so no one would find her needs inconvenient, who would have said, even sick on a Tuesday, "Oh, you didn't have to do that. I'm fine. I was just going to rest." Managing the moment, managing him, managing how much space she was allowed to take up. She didn't do any of that. She just stepped aside and let him in. He didn't make a big deal about the state of the apartment or ask if she needed anything else or try to fix the evening. He just sat with her, soup between them on the coffee table, the same something she wasn't watching on TV, easy and quiet and real. "Thank you," she said at some point, meaning it simply. "Of course," he said, meaning it the same way. She let herself be taken care of. That was new. That was, she realized, what she'd been calling safe when the right word had always been love. Her own name. There was a message from Jay she hadn't answered yet. It had been sitting in her phone for 3 days, not ignored exactly, just not ready for yet. She'd looked at the preview once, enough to know it wasn't an emergency and wasn't an ultimatum, and set the phone face up on the counter because she was done putting things face down. She'd think about it when she was ready. She was allowed to do that. The apartment was quieter than it used to be, and she'd been surprised to find she didn't mind the quiet the way she'd expected to. She'd been afraid of it back when she was watching for clues, filling the silence with observation and cataloguing. Now the quiet felt like something she'd earned. She'd moved some things around, not in a dramatic, purging way. She wasn't throwing everything away, just small shifts, a plant on the windowsill, a painting she'd always loved in a better light, a chair repositioned so the first thing she saw in the morning was the window instead of the wall. Small choices, entirely hers. She sat down with her phone and opened a new notes page. For weeks, she'd used notes to track delayed replies, phone face down, the Brian pause, a careful private record of a truth she was building toward. The page was blank now, nothing to collect, nothing to prove. She sat with the blankness for a moment, and then slowly she typed her own name at the top, just her name. Nothing after it yet. She didn't know what she was going to do about the marriage. She didn't know if Jay's message was the beginning of a real conversation or the beginning of an ending. She didn't know what this apartment looked like in a year, or who was in it with her, or whether she was going to grieve all of this properly before she got to the other side of it. What she did know was that she was the one asking those questions now, from a place of clarity, not fear. Not from a woman watching from a doorway, waiting to understand what she was looking at. From herself. The cursor blinked after her name, patient and open. She smiled at the empty page. Then she started writing. The other side. They didn't plan to make it a big thing. It was just brunch. The same brunch they'd had 100 times, the same table, the same too much food, the same conversations that started about one thing and became something else entirely 20 minutes in. But somewhere in the middle of it, without anyone announcing it, it became something a little more than that. Ciara was telling a story about something Nick had said, and she was smiling the whole way through it, not the careful smile of someone protecting themselves, but the full, unguarded kind, and she didn't check herself once. Jazz was doing voices, because Jazz was always going to do voices, but underneath the bit there was a steadiness that hadn't been there a year ago, a person comfortable enough in her own skin that the performance and the self were starting to look like the same thing. Ava kept starting sentences with Corey and I in this casual, unthinking way, like it was already just a fact about her life, which it was, which she was still quietly getting used to. And Brianna was just there, fully there, the way she hadn't been for a long time, not watching the room for clues, or managing her reactions, or holding something back. Just a woman at a table with her 3 best friends, present in her own life. At some point, the food got cold because the conversation was better. Nobody reached for the check first. "I don't want to go," Ava said, eventually, just saying it plain, no embarrassment in it. "Then don't," Jazz said. So they didn't. Not yet. There was a moment, quiet, accidental, the kind you can't manufacture, where all 4 of them were just there at the same time, in the same warmth of the same table they'd been coming back to for years. They didn't know what was coming next. None of them did. Brianna's life was still in the process of being figured out. Ciara and Nick were still learning what they were. Jazz and Justin were still at the beginning of something real. Ava was still surprised, most mornings, by how good actually felt. None of it was finished, but none of them were in between anymore either. They were just here, themselves, together. And that was not nothing. That was actually everything. They had always been going to be okay. They just had to get here first.
Sometimes the destination wasn't another person. It was finally becoming yourself.
Thanks for watching In Between Us.